Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Unit 4 of Women's and Gender Studies 201. We're talking this week looking at some different strains of ecofeminism and also looking at ecological footprint and Rachel Carson, who's a really well-known scientist, and for the first time when she published Silent Spring in 1962 really brought the potential for ecological damage and climate change and this sort of thing to the forefront of the sort of general public, of the masses, so to speak, and out of the world of science. And then also you have some notes on uranium mining. So in terms of liberal feminism and socialist feminism and this sort of thing, they function in much the same way that they do when we're talking about feminism just at large, right, within the ecofeminist framework. Same sorts of approaches, their framework is the same, and they're critiqued for the same reasons, right? The liberal feminists are considered to be, accepting of a system that many feminists find unappealing and think needs to change. Not to say that they are not looking for change, but they're willing to work within certain hierarchies and power structures and institutions and this sort of thing. The socialists see that the way that labor is constructed, the division of labor, and the sort of dichotomies, same thing. That capitalism versus the environment, capitalism is at the root of the problem, and so really it's just you're taking what we already know about any number of sort of strains of feminism and transferring that knowledge onto an environmental sort of landscape, and you see that those critiques of those particular kinds of feminisms tend to be the same, and that their approaches obviously are not far off than if we were just talking about them kind of generally. When we look at radical feminism, again, no big surprises here, although I think it's interesting to note that particularly where ecofeminism is concerned, there are strains of radical ecofeminism that really see sort of centering women's potential as mothers, like Mother Earth, right? This ability to create life, to give life, to sustain life, as being front and center and something that we need to claim as a source of power, and we need to take it back, and there are, some legitimate, I think, reasons to look at how we can vision those aspects of our biology in a different kind of way, and maybe value them in a way that they are not. As you see in your notes, it's an essentialist kind of view, and it's problematic on its own to ever reduce women to our biology. That hasn't worked for us so far. In fact, Rachel Carson was, childless and, hysterical, and the whole thing with the wandering woman, it hasn't fulfilled its role, and so she can't possibly be taken seriously, and this kind of thing. And so truly aligning ourselves solely with biology hasn't worked well for women. It's been a very dangerous and slippery path. And I think when we start essentializing and talking about qualities like nurturing and compassion and this instinct for life and the kinds of things that sort of go along with really choosing to put women forth as though they're this life-giving capacity forms the core of who we all are. We deny the experiences of lots of women, and also we provide fodder for reducing us to just only that. Lots of women don't want to be mothers. Lots of women have no desire to be mothers. And if we choose to embrace a particular, this particular aspect, say, of radical ecofeminism, or radical feminism in general, actually, I think we do sort of more harm than good, because then it sets up anybody who doesn't fall into that, who doesn't feel that way, who can't embrace it, doesn't choose to, doesn't want to, as being flawed somehow, or abnormal, or outside the realm of what we should be able to expect of women. And feminism at its core, ecofeminism as well, I mean any strain of feminism at its core has this autonomy, right? The idea that women should be autonomous human beings and should be free to choose. And so while there are aspects, I think, of radical ecofeminism in particular that I find very fruitful and I think can be helpful as we move forward in addressing both sort of the larger sort of structural inequalities, and when we're talking specifically about the environment, I think it can be really fruitful and very helpful, and that are maybe some necessary tactics and ideas that in order to sort of push the envelope a little bit and start turning the tide here from where we're at. I think by the same token, it's important to be very careful because the potential there is dangerous, I think, for women to reduce us solely to the elements of biology that may or may not be present for all women, that certainly, though, do not drive the direction of every woman's life. And so I encourage you, when you're reading that, to sort of have a look at reflect on your own life and see where you can see this, how this might play out for you, or if you can think of women in your life who have, struggled with this. I think, it's so many people who wouldn't call themselves radical at all, embrace this idea of Mother Earth. And I think a lot of people talk about, that the Earth sustains life, right? And if we continue to damage the Earth the way that we do, it's going to be unable to sustain human life and maybe all other forms of life. That this is part of the drive to reduce our ecological footprint and start thinking about doing things differently. And it's interesting because I think so many of us toss around this Mother Earth, and see the Earth as a mother figure without thinking about the implications. And so, for women, and how we think about what it means to be a mother. And so ecofeminism and radical ecofeminism in this particular place gives us a really interesting opportunity to kind of connect the dots right between what we're talking about when we think about ecology and the environment and the sort of current situation, and how that is reflected often by what's happening in our social world and on a social level. Like I said, you have some reading to do about Rachel Carson, who really, Silent Spring was a groundbreaking book, and for the first time, kind of, all of this sciencey lingo jargon, these ideas that have previously sort of not been very accessible at all, were made accessible to the general public, to the average human being, to think about the world that they're living in and the potential harm that we've been doing. And so, super interesting read, and she, unfortunately and interestingly enough, would die quite young of breast cancer. You also have a little option, or like a section in your notes about your ecological footprint, what that means. And, I think there's a link in there too for you to go to the Royal Saskatchewan Museum and calculate your own ecological footprint. And it's, your ecological footprint has to do with your lifestyle and what is required in terms of the draw on the land, right, in order to sustain the way we live. So you in particular, Canadians in general, North Americans in general, people who have a higher income, right, more developed nations tend to have a higher ecological footprint, which means we draw more resources away from the land in order to sustain the way that we live than other places. And you'll see in your notes that we would need at least 3.5 for us to sustain the human population, for everybody to live the way that we do, and upwards from that if we want to include other sort of life forms. And so again, this provides an in, right? I think often people feel a little bit removed. You have this section on uranium mining, and I think we think about nuclear energy, and we think about the oil prices, and we only kind of can connect to those things when they impact our own lives and when we see how we have a relationship to them, right? So like the price of gas. But this doing your ecological footprint gives you an opportunity to really connect to some of these issues and to see where choices that we make absolutely have an impact on the world around us and how the future potentially is going to be, right? It's the concept of flourishing and that ethic of care, and thinking about the next generation and how the choices we make today don't necessarily take into account the ability of the next generation to flourish and other life forms to flourish. And so so much of the way that we live we take for granted because it's a given and this is just how it is. And so go ahead and calculate your own. It's a really an interesting little activity to get you thinking about who we are as individuals. Truly, we are connected to everything else, and the choices we make do have an impact. And I think, often whether we're talking about environmental stuff or other social justice issues, we think like, what can I do because I'm only one person? This is a concrete, excellent example of your very own impact on the world around you, and will demonstrate clearly, I think, that the choices that you choose to make, should you choose to reconfigure your life a little bit after you see what your footprint is, can have a profound difference. And that if we all took that personal responsibility seriously, I mean, the effect would be huge. The magnification of that effect, if when you look at the marches that are currently happening, right? The anti-Trump, the resistance movement, it is grassroots, it is government, it's coming from all over the world. But those marches started with individuals, right, who thought, like, this is not okay with me. And so now we've got hundreds of thousands of and millions of people who are engaged. And these issues around the environment are the same thing, right? If everyone ate meatless one day a week, the amount of resources that could be saved. If everyone chose, to monitor their water consumption, for example, in terms of showering and bathing and teeth brushing and laundry and all of those things, or garbage output, in terms of recycling and composting and those kinds of things, right? You think about one person, just yourself, yeah, it's hard to see how that's going to make, it's like a tiny little drop in a very large bucket, right? But if it's you and everybody you know and everybody that they know, like, pretty soon that ripple effect is big, and the effect starts to be big, and the change that we can see, that we can actually actively participate in making, starts to be something that we can measure. So I hope that you feel a little bit inspired when you do your ecological footprint about things that you can change. This stuff is often overwhelming and sort of difficult to navigate, but I think that gives you some insight into who you can choose to be as an agent of change. And it's pretty cool to look at and see what your life actually looks like. So, that said, I'm just finishing marking your quizzes. So those marks will be released over the next, 30 hours, let's say, like today, tomorrow. You're also going to be getting an email. The discussion groups will be posted right away here. They're just being generated. And so that will be available quite quickly. And so even though they were supposed to open yesterday, you'll have an extra day next week to continue posting. I don't know if you can hear my voice. I'm still sick. And so I'm just not quite as on the jump as I have been planning to be. I keep thinking I'm on the mend and then I'm going to make some headway, and then it's 2 steps backwards, and I'm my eyes have been running out of sinus infection. It's just been nuts. I can't kind of get this thing beat. So I'm slowly getting caught up here and on top of things. But that's the end of it for this week. If you have any questions, please contact me. Otherwise, happy reading, happy watching, and I will see you next week. Take care.